Good morning. We try that again. Good morning. All right. My name is Ronan Kirby, and I work for Nginx. That's like engine in a car with an X at the end. It's not Nginx, or it's like the old Linux thing. So it's Nginx, or at least that's how we call it. So I'm going to try and fill 30 minutes to talk to you today about something that's maybe a little different than I've written up here, actually. It's more I'd like to talk to you about the journey that Nginx has been on since 2002, leading to where we are today, which is a company with venture funding, with in around the region of 200 staff across the US, multiple offices in Europe, Russia, and over 1,000 enterprise customers. And I think it's fair to say a relatively successful business. I have to say that because I'm responsible for the EMEA number. So rather than give you the normal product pitch, which is kind of what I'm used to doing, I'm sort of pull myself back from that line a little and talk to you about our open source journey and how that open source journey is helping enterprises scale applications. A little bit of background on me as we get into this. I spent about 10, 11 years at Red Hat when I joined Red Hat when Red Hat was about 450 people, which is a little less than the 10,000 it is now. And open source was, as a commercial venture, I suppose, slightly less mature than it is today. And we were trying to educate people on what things like subscriptions and all of those were. In fact, we hadn't even come up with subscriptions really as an industry at the time. So let me start by giving you a brief-ish look at the history of Nginx. So Nginx was originally written by Igor Sysoyev in 2002. Igor was trying to solve a problem that an awful lot of people were working on at the time, which many of you will remember, which is the C10K problem. So this was the challenge of getting a web server to handle 10,000 concurrent connections, a number that today seems like such a tiny number, but at the time this was a real issue. So people's approach to it at the time really was to hack Apache to death. All right, Apache was the de facto web server. People were putting it on bigger and bigger Linux servers, FreeBSD servers, and so on. It was all about taking advantage of what SMP could do for you at the time. And Igor, who was working for Rambler is like a Russian internet provider and content provider. Igor took what I call a classically Russian approach to it, which was, I can engineer something better. So Igor decided to ground up write a new piece of software, Nginx. And this is what he wrote. This is clear to everybody, right? We're asking questions on this later. Oh dear, how did that happen? We'll give you another minute on that slide, just to make sure you fully absorb it. Oh my goodness. What do you think is happening here? All right, stay. So, oh my good. This isn't getting frustrated. Oh, hang on, it's on an auto. There we go. Sorry. Any technical people about now? Okay. Oh, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to hover here with my finger here. No.
Automatic NDA.
Yes. Do you think it'll stay there? You know what? I'm just going to escape from the presentation for a second, if you don't mind, and I will play it again from current slide. Okay. So what he wrote was Nginx, the open source web server that many of you know. Wow. This is starting to get a little bit annoying. Yep. You know, the space bar is moving it. So, yes, I've hit the pause. So it's on pause here. Okay. One last time. Prevent review. Nope. If I was using OpenOffice Impress, this wouldn't happen, right? So I'm going to come back to that in a second. Maybe if I close PowerPoint and open it again, that always works, right? So what Igor wrote was this really scalable piece of non-blocking architecture as a web server, okay? A 3 megabyte footprint that scales up incredibly fast, but doesn't hold on to resources. So if something isn't needed, it scales back down again, not holding on to things. And this made it an incredibly fast and scalable and lightweight web server. So he open sourced it in 2004, just pushed it out into the wild, into the Russian open source community, and maintained it a little, did some maintenance on it, some updates, patching, but not a whole lot else. And fast forward to 2007, while reading a Google security blog, saw that Nginx was listed as being 4% of the web server market. And he thought, how on earth did this happen? This is a piece of software that's in Russian only. There is no marketing behind it. There's no company behind it. There is no English documentation. How the hell is 4% of the internet running on this software? And this is really a classic example of open source adoption within the community. It's a great example of people trying to find the best tool to solve a problem. So in 2011, they couldn't keep up with the demand that was the maintenance updates, the fixes, the patches, the feature update, or the feature requests for Nginx. So Igor, along with 2 of his colleagues from Rambler, left to set up Nginx Inc. with a headquarters in San Francisco. And if we look at what's happened in Nginx since that time, there are now 350 million websites today, active websites, running Nginx as a web server. 60% of the top 10,000 busiest websites on the planet are running Nginx, and over half of the busiest 100,000 websites on the internet are running Nginx. If we look into the cloud space, 40% of all instances on AWS have Nginx actively running inside it. And that continues across the internet. If you look at Docker Hub, by a long shot, Nginx is the most downloaded software on Docker Hub. In fact, today, Nginx powers over 35% of the traffic on the public internet. And that's not a bad place to be for an open source piece of software. But it also presents a set of challenges. So now we'll look at how does Nginx embrace open source, and how do we sustain the development of Nginx, the open source software. Before I go any further, hands up here who had heard of Nginx before coming here today or yesterday. Great. Hands up if you knew there was a company behind it. All right, that's better than sometimes. Hands up if you know about Nginx Plus. Hands down if you work at Nginx. All right. There's a few. That's not so bad. So the challenge we had was, how do we maintain the development of Nginx, but being true to open source, keeping it both free and as open source software, but at the same time, build a successful business around this. So there's only $1 billion open source business today. That's Red Hat. And many of us in this room are on the journey to trying to create the second $1 billion open source business. Whether that's Nginx or something else, we're all trying to ultimately get to that same goal. And for us, it really is about striking a balance. So when Nginx was formed into a company in 2011, there were a lot of changes happening in the industry. I suppose there are always a lot of changes happening in the industry. The traditional three-tier architectures were moving towards microservices. Really complex protocols were being replaced with very, very simple and web-based protocols. I'd like to say we were moving to containers, but in this audience, someone will point out to me that containers were around longer than most things on the screen here. But containers in their modern form, and containers within Linux environments. And DevOps was very much becoming, and agile methodologies were very much becoming the mechanism embraced by companies both culturally and technology-wise. And when this happens, engineers will typically run toward tools that can solve the problems that these new approaches create for them. And as we were doing this, or excuse me, as we were forming into a company, our CEO, Gus Robertson, was speaking to enterprises about how they were dealing with these challenges, how they were using Nginx. And the answer that came back was very, very clear. Everybody was using Nginx at the core of delivering their applications, but they were using a whole host of other open source tools around it to try and deliver their applications, to try and deliver great online experiences for their customers. And so that in itself became how Nginx was going to be a sustainable and ultimately profitable business. And that was through the creation of Nginx Plus. Nginx Plus is our enterprise-focused application delivery platform. And it is taking all of those tools and additional features and functions and scripts and glue that people were creating around the open source project Nginx, the open source web server, to use it as an application delivery platform. But we were going to take a lot of the downside of doing that away from enterprises, make it more sustainable, more scalable, by building it into a single platform that enables companies to do flawless application delivery. So Nginx Plus is an open core model. So we have the open source Nginx project, which will always remain open source. And on top of that, we have an additional set of features and functions which are only available in the Nginx Plus product. As with pretty much every commercial open source offering today, it's subscription based, although it's something we're particularly flexible about because in today's modern auto-scaling environments and containerized environments, you get massive sprawls, so it's very hard to just do sort of traditional subscription pricing. So we have very flexible commercial models, unlimited consumption models. And what this allows us to do is to continue the development of the Nginx project. So by having this commercial offering, we can sustainably keep developing both the open source project while we build a business based on the enterprise application delivery platform. So let's take a look at what that platform does, how people are using it, and what its use cases are. So that's interesting. Here we go again. Oh, there are builds on it. This is what happens when you steal slides from somebody else. You don't know there are builds on it. So flawless application delivery focuses around 5 different areas. You need to have advanced load balancing and caching. So you need to be able to accelerate your application. You need to be able to scale your application. You need to make sure that your application is always available to your customers. As part of that, you also have to have health checks. So if you don't have active health checks, something that's proactively checking whether your application is working properly or not, then it's going to be a customer who discovers. It's going to be a live customer connection that discovers whether or not your application is available. You need extremely good security and access controls, both to mitigate against bad actors, as well as unintentional mishaps towards your traffic, whether that's distributed denial of service attacks, whether that is people trying to do cross-site scripting, SQL injection, you name it. You're just as familiar as I am with what it takes to secure an application. You need to be able to monitor it and manage it, whether that's through native tools that come with your application delivery platform or by plugging it into other application performance monitoring platforms. And finally, you need to have that backed up by somebody. In a moment of crisis, there's no point in turning to a community to solve your Sev1 issue at midnight on a Friday night when your entire customer base is off the air. So we built Nginx around a number of different areas, our Nginx Plus. It can be used as an advanced load balancer. It can be used as a content cache. It can be used as a web server, just like the open source project. It can be used for doing the security, as well as the management and the monitoring. So we can liken this to the engine of a car, or liken it to an engine. An engine doesn't have to just be used in a car. You can use an engine in a water pump. You can use it in an electricity generator. You can use it in a bus, in a car, in a motorbike. So Nginx Plus is that engine with so many different use cases. We'll have a look at those use cases in a minute. Before we get on to the kind of additional features and functions that we have built into Nginx Plus, if we look at what we deliver in that subscription, and first and foremost in that list is proactive security updates and bug fixes. There's a tipping point in industry and in enterprise, everybody here knows this, I think, where the risk of unsupported open source software is just not something that you can take for your business. It's not worth the exposure, the cost to your business if something goes wrong. So the first thing we do, even if you're not using the additional features and functions of Nginx Plus, is we provide proactive security updates and bug fixes. So in real terms, before a CVE is ever published, before a patch ever goes out to the community, our Nginx Plus customers have proactively received the fix for those bugs before they go public. Because we see it, right? With 350 million websites running Nginx, we see that when we release a patch, people are immediately reviewing that patch to see what exploit are we fixing, what are we trying to patch, and can they exploit that across the massive public-facing install base of Nginx. So we make sure that our enterprise customers do not have to worry about that. They have at least 2 weeks of having received that patch before they have to, before we will publish the CVE. And that doesn't just go for security, it goes for ordinary bug fixes as well. We have 24/7 support with an SLA down to 30 minutes. In fact, our average response time for this quarter, for Q2, is 27 minutes. Which isn't bad. And in actual fact, because our users tend to be so technical, they typically will submit an email ticket rather than a telephone ticket because they can put a lot of information into that email. And on average, when they do, we give them the full fix in the first response. So you're looking at people getting a fix to a Sev1 issue in 27 minutes. Normally when we get support tickets in, it's down to configuration or environmental issues. But occasionally we do have people identify issues within Nginx itself. So we have the ability to issue hotfixes. So our support team are co-located quite literally in the same space as our core engineering team. And when something is identified as being a flaw or a problem in Nginx Plus, we can issue a hotfix directly to the customer if they are off the air, to get them back on the air, while that bug fix then goes through the normal QA process and gets pushed out to all of our customers. So really the key being get that application back and available as quickly as possible. We also do certification, so we certify across certain Linux distributions, a bit like your operating system certifying against hardware. If it doesn't work, it's our problem, not your problem. Similarly, we have a growing ecosystem around third-party module providers who are certifying module plugins for Nginx Plus. The software binaries that you get for Nginx Plus have been through proper QA and testing. It's not like the release cycle of the open source project, which is a much, much quicker release cycle. So of course there is QA involved in that release cycle, but it is not to the same enterprise level that you get with Nginx Plus. It's a subscription, so as new versions become available, you get those new versions, obviously. Confidentiality is an interesting one, and this is something that came up with one of our customers recently. And that is that when you have an issue, do you really want your engineers to be seen out in public forums discussing that issue, searching for problems for that issue? So the confidentiality that comes with being able to call our engineers and say, hey, this is, large bank, large telco, we have a problem. You don't want those questions being asked in public. That confidentiality is very important, or even the very nature of the query that they might have could lead to you being exposed. And then the rest, you have product documentation, you have stable API interfaces. We offer indemnity over the certain parts of the distribution. And our enterprise customers are also part of a product advisory group, so they can potentially contribute to the direction of the product as well. And that's all before we get to the additional features and functions of Nginx Plus. So these are focused, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'll speed up if the slides don't already start doing it for me again. So the key features and functions of Nginx Plus are around load balancing. So we provide load balancing for HTTP, TCP, UDP, HTTPS. So even though we're sitting at the top of the stack, we still go down a couple of layers. We provide session persistence. We provide really fine-grained cache control through the API. We provide application-based health checks. So not just, is my application responding, yes or no, but what is it responding with? Is it a 400? Is it a 500? Those are still responses, but they're not the right responses. That's certainly not something you would want to pass through to a customer. We also do service discovery through DNS, so we can use most of the service discovery tools that you'd be familiar with. On the security side, we have a web application firewall. It's based on Mod Security 3.0. If any of you here have tried to use Mod Security with Nginx before, it typically involved recompiling Mod Security 2.9, the Apache intended release, putting it on Nginx, unstable, not suitable for an enterprise deployment. So we have our own ground-up rewrite of Mod Security available on Nginx Plus. We also do Java Web Token authentication. We do single sign-on through OpenID Connect. We have a lot of additional features and functions around streaming and bandwidth management of that streaming. We do live activity monitoring. And one of the most important things in the kind of environments that I suspect we're all working in today is on-the-fly reconfiguration. So in other words, as you do multiple releases during a day, you're not interrupting the availability of your application just because you're updating your config. So whether that's pushing a new release or removing something from your cluster, it's not affected. So very, very quickly, if we look at the traditional use cases for this, first and foremost is replacing the traditional hardware load balancer. So that's your F5 Big IP, Citrix NetScaler, and so on. Whether it's a physical appliance or a virtual appliance, Nginx Plus is a tiny software footprint that essentially runs anywhere Linux can run. So that is hardware, virtualization, private cloud, public cloud, in containers. It really doesn't matter. So it's very flexible. It's a fraction of the cost, typically. There are no artificial limits put on it, so your throughput is not limited by us. So the bigger infrastructure you put it on, the more throughput you can do with it. And it's DevOps friendly. You can plug this into your automation tools. You can do many reloads during the day. It absolutely doesn't matter. So there are two really common deployments. One is where you would replace your traditional hardware load balancer. That's a good solution, saves you a lot of money. The other is where you would stick it behind an existing set of hardware load balancers. And this is a very common scenario whereby a DevOps team need to make updates frequently. They're doing releases during a day, but they can't get the network team to keep up because making a change to the hardware load balancers means submitting a ticket. That ticket gets worked on. That ticket gets updated eventually. It's certainly not conducive to the agile development and the kind of updates that a DevOps team need to do. From there, the next use case is people using us for cloud migration. And we see this an awful lot, particularly in banking and telco, where people need to very gradually, over time, migrate from an older version of an application to a new one, not a forklift upgrade. So what people are doing is sticking Nginx Plus in front of their existing application and using its content-based routing to gradually, over time, redirect bits of that application into a new infrastructure or a new environment. So it's a very scalable, maintainable way of slowly moving your application bit by bit over time. It also helps people who are moving to more microservices style architectures, which I'll talk about in a second. The other thing this does is putting Nginx Plus in front of that legacy application instantly gives that application scale. We see it time and time again that just sticking a standard configuration of Nginx Plus in front of an application, the smoothing effect that Nginx Plus will gives a performance increase and therefore longevity to that legacy application. So what we're moving towards then is using Nginx Plus as your API gateway. So it acts as that shock absorber when you're getting all of those connections in and scales up really, really smoothly and quickly and then scales down again as needed. It's doing your security. It's doing your routing based on the, actually, I was going to say based on the headers. Actually, it can route based on pretty much anything that comes in. And again, allows you to start breaking out applications slowly and surely over time. And the ultimate evolution of this, and it's probably what we spend most of our time talking about, is it going into microservices environments. Now, this is something that in itself is probably a 1 hour talk, so I'll try and do it justice in 30 seconds or less. Essentially what we have is people putting Nginx Plus into every container in what's called a sidecar model. So microservices speaking to each other through Nginx Plus. That allows you, first of all, to secure through SSL all of the connections back and forth through the different microservices, which might sound inefficient, but Nginx, one, through its natural efficiency, and two, through the fact that it uses keep alive D to maintain those connections and has session persistence, means you don't have the normal overhead that comes with running SSL in between all of your microservices. We've got the service discovery. So it means that as you add more microservices, as you scale out, because you've had a peak demand on one part of your application, you can make all of the existing containers or microservices aware of the new instances. That, of course, uses the on-the-fly reconfiguration as well to update the configs of them. It gives you acceleration through caching. And of course, it load balances and gives health checks through the entire architecture as well. So this is a connective fabric between microservices that solves a lot of problems that people are having today. And while not everybody is doing 100% of this architecture, it's definitely where people are moving. Whether it's starting using Nginx Plus as an ingress controller at the edge of their application, and then over time to put another one internally within that containerized environment to act as a centralized router. And then slowly but surely, as the application grows, moving to this sidecar model where you're putting Nginx Plus into every microservice. So, to summarize, Nginx Plus is a DevOps-centric enterprise application delivery platform. So it works across physical, virtual, and all clouds. It encourages growth as opposed to penalizing it, so we don't put artificial limitations on throughput, on connectivity, or on anything like that. We save you a truckload of money when you're doing it if you've been using traditional hardware or appliance-based load balancers. Sticking Nginx Plus in front of legacy applications gives those legacy applications longevity. It gives them scale. It gives you the ability to scale out horizontally applications which don't naturally cluster. And it gives you the time or the breadth to be able to gradually migrate those applications over time, whether it's just from one stack to another or from physical or on-prem into cloud. It really doesn't matter. And we're solving real-world problems that people have today around microservices and containerized environments. We're mitigating the inherent risks that come to enterprise, to large enterprise, with open source software, but at the same time, allowing us to continue the development of a really great open source project that is the Nginx web server, and building a sustainable business while we're doing so. And thank you very much.